Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Revolution 250 podcast. I'm Bob Allison. I chair the Rev 250 Advisory Group, and our guest today is Emily Murphy. Emily Murphy is the curator at the Salem Maritime National Historical Site and the Saugus Ironworks National Historical Site. She has an undergraduate degree from St. John's College in Maryland, an MA in history from Penn State, and a doctorate in history, the history of American civilization from Boston University. And she is, as I said, the curator at these two terrific historical sites, one in Saugus, one in Salem. And we're here to talk actually about something, one of these little known facts that Salem plays a very important role in the beginnings of the American Revolution because that was under General Thomas Gage, the capital of Massachusetts. So, Emily, tell us what's going on with Gage and Salem.
Well, I mean, as I'm not sure everybody knows, but as happens, we have it really kind of starts with the Boston Tea Party, of course, and the kind of both parliamentary and military reaction to that. So Gage, is appointed royal governor. He arrives shortly after the Boston Port Bill, closing the port of Boston, arrives in Boston. And one of the orders that he has with him is to move the legislature from Boston to Salem if he feels that it is necessary. And apparently he did feel it was necessary because very shortly after he arrived in Boston, he is moving to Salem. He actually arrives in Salem on June 7th in 1774.
It's just about a week after he arrived.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's like, I mean, so he obviously was given orders to just get everything out of Boston.
Yeah, and the other British governors had wanted to move the capital out of Boston because they thought it was too susceptible to pressure.
And I believe it was Hutchinson who had basically he tried to move them to Watertown, I think, at one point. And basically the entire legislative session consisted of the legislators, protesting the fact that they had been moved out of their traditional seat of government.
Right. And it's probably one of the reasons why after the Revolution, Massachusetts does not move its capital. Most of the other states do move west. We don't.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at, like in Pennsylvania, the capital moves to Harrisburg because it was considered more central at that point.
Yeah. It does move about 3 blocks west, but not.
That's a lot in Boston, though. I mean,
that's right. We move slowly and shortly. Okay, so how does Salem react to becoming the capital under Gage?
It's interesting because there are basically two schools of thought in Salem about this. One seems to be summarized by the as we say the Friends of Government, who are a group of pretty much allied families, most of whom are related in some way, shape, or form to Governor Hutchinson, and they are very established. A lot of them are there are a few sort of active merchants, but most of them are making their income out of rents, land holdings, things like that. And they're the ones who are sort of happy to see Gage moving to Salem. They think Salem is going to be a wonderful place. They are the phrase that they use that is that we're deeply sensible of His Majesty's paternal care and affection, and they hope that the other phrase is we beg leave to commend to your Excellency's patronage the trade and commerce of this place, which from a full protection of the liberties of persons and properties of individuals cannot but flourish. So there because the other thing that remember that's happening is that Gage has moved all of the customs stuff to Marblehead and Salem.
Right.
And so this is going to be a huge boost to the economy.
Particularly because Boston is closed. The port of Boston has been shut down.
Exactly. So that's one school of thought. And then the other school of thought is from, the I'm going to say more recent families, so families that moved in, say the
Hmm.
1660s instead of the 1630s, and the more of the tradespeople, the successful tradespeople, and that's families like the Darbys, and
Hmm.
their allies like the Gardners and the Pickerings and folks like that, and they're really not happy with this, and a lot of that is because this is an upheaval to the traditional way of running the
Right.
colony, and what's interesting also is that Richard Darby Jr., who's sort of the oldest son of the Darby
Mm.
family, he was first elected to the Massachusetts legislature in 1768. Before that, it had all been Olivers and Lynes and Kerwins and that those sort of Hutchinson allied
Hmm.
families who'd basically been running Salem. So this is like, these are folks who sort of have used the Patriot cause to kind of come to power in Salem.
Hmm.
So there are two separate addresses that are given to Gage, one from these more conservative families and one from
Hmm.
the more radical families, and they're both published in the newspaper, so
Hmm.
who
Yeah.
falls on which
Right.
side.
Interesting.
And Gage apparently was very pleased with the loyal address,
Right.
and less so with the
Hmm.
folks who are kind of pointing out that this was a violation of rights and laws.
Well, it's interesting that it's these more recent folks, the rising ones, who see this as a disruption of the traditional order. And the ones we think would be the upholders of the traditional order are fine with Gage moving to Salem.
Yeah, that is something that is really curious, but I think it's also a mark of the fact that the sort of older families have lost a lot of the control
Hmm.
of Salem. So they're seeing this as an opportunity for Gage to reinstate them
Hmm.
in their
Right.
as the controlling families, both sort of socially and politically,
Hmm.
because there's a huge ball that's held for Gage, and and folks
Hmm.
come to that, and it's and so I think there's a lot of hope that that
Hmm.
things will be reinstated.
Right. Right. Yeah. So then what happens? So Gage also wants the assembly to meet in Salem. He also has to
Yes.
assemble a council that is sometime in June or July, the Massachusetts Government Act arrives, which says, can
Yes.
you tell us a bit about what happens with all of this?
Well, that's the that's where things get fun, because that's where
Mm.
you have the Gage appoints a council, and the counselors basically say no,
Yeah.
because the traditional way of doing things was that, and this is what makes Massachusetts legislative stuff really interesting, is that the Massachusetts legislature appointed a council from among
Hmm.
their own body,
Right.
and then the governor did have right of refusal,
Hmm.
but he could not appoint his own people. And this is a
Hmm.
big difference between the way Massachusetts is handled and a colony like, say, Maryland,
Hmm.
because the governor of Maryland would appoint his own council, and
Right.
it didn't have to be from people in the legislature.
Hmm.
That gave him a lot of both social and political power.
Hmm.
Whereas it was much more likely that a Massachusetts counselor was going to be more beholden to what the legislature wants to
Right.
do, besides what the governor wants
Right.
to do.
Yeah.
So these counselor, so there's this whole sort of upheaval that
Yeah.
happens, and then the legislature goes ahead and creates its own council,
Yeah.
from
And then
within
you
them.
have he has trouble finding people first who will agree to serve, and then when those who do are then pressured to resign.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So those mandamus counselors are just not,
Hmm.
are not interested in going through. I mean, because they've seen what's been happening, in Boston,
Oh, yeah.
and so I think part of, and there is a little bit, you see a little bit of this fear of that same sort of, mob violence
Hmm.
coming to Salem.
Hmm.
It's less likely. I mean, Salem is a much smaller community,
Hmm.
than Boston. In Boston at that time, um, has a total population of, I believe, around 15,000
Hmm.
at that time. And Salem, at least the total, the white population of Boston is, yeah, it's about 14,000, and then there's about almost 1,000 African people of
Hmm.
African descent living there.
Hmm.
Salem only has about 4,200 white residents and about 200 black residents.
Yeah.
So it's a much smaller community.
Yeah.
Everybody knows each other. And
Hmm.
so, I think a lot of these, we don't see a lot of evidence of this pressure, especially in Salem. But I think that's because a lot of it was done, at the tavern or in the
Right.
parlor, or it wasn't, you don't
Hmm.
have a lot of those sort of
Hmm.
newspaper, people being
Right.
published in the newspapers the way they were in
Yeah.
Boston.
Yeah.
So,
In Marblehead, they're having a big flap about the people in Marblehead who had signed a letter thanking Governor Hutchinson for his service.
yes.
Yeah, done nothing
Yeah,
like
and that
that. Yeah, yeah, that's a big issue in Marblehead, and so you can see that contentiousness there. Even though they're trying to maintain kind of it's a small town, everyone knows each other, so you know how people are thinking.
exactly, and
Right,
and and that's where you start to see these retractions getting printed in the
right,
newspapers where
right.
people are like, "Hey, I didn't really mean to sign that. I'm
Yeah, that's
sorry.
it.
I was,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
Didn't read it. Yeah, we're talking
I
with
didn't."
Emily Murphy, who's the curator at the Salem Maritime National Historical Site, as well as the Saugus Ironworks National Historical Site. And we're talking about the time General Thomas Gage was trying to be the governor of Massachusetts in Salem. And I know you have an event coming up at Salem Maritime in a couple of weeks, June 15th and 16th, about this. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, so we wanted to do something that would both sort of talk about this tension, because it's not just Gage who's coming into these communities. He's bringing two regiments with him.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
so the first one to arrive is the 64th, and they have there's a company that end up um, in Marblehead. So they're
Hmm.
there to kind of protect the customs officials who are in Marblehead, and then the rest of the regiment ends up in outside of Danvers. So Gage actually rents a country home in Danvers, right near where the Liberty Tree Mall is nowadays. If you know the geography of Danvers at all,
Hmm.
so it's about 4 or 5 miles
Hmm.
from the house he's renting into Salem. And so he's got his officers are in another building, but the rest of the folks are encamped kind of around
Hmm.
the house. Um, and so he and so this is and so these soldiers are coming in and out. And then as these tensions start to increase, throughout the summer, with the whole controversy with the counselors. Gage has another sort of run in with the committee of safety and the selectmen, as
Hmm.
resistance to this Massachusetts government
Yeah.
act starts to
Yeah.
happen. He then brings in August, he brings in the 59th Regiment.
Mm-hmm.
And they are actually encamped in what's now the Salem Willows
Ah.
area. There's a fort down near the
Hmm.
Salem Willows that they were encamped in. Not Fort Pickering; it was called the New Fort. It's kind of in the center of
Right.
the
Hmm.
willows there. And so he's, so this is a lot of people that
Yeah.
are suddenly coming into this small community.
Hmm.
And they're not only it's not only them. I found, as I was doing my research, I found a couple of mentions that they're bringing their wives and children with them. So they're
Mm-hmm.
moving the entire
Right.
family. So they're figuring they're going to be here for a while.
Hmm.
And so, this is a lot for Salem.
Oh
So we
yeah.
wanted to do something that was going to reflect that. So down here at Salem Maritime, we have Derby, next to Derby Wharf, we have a rather large open area.
Hmm.
So we've invited a number of British units from the area. We have folks coming from as far south as New Jersey, and they're going to come up and they're going to camp. A number of them are going to camp overnight with us, so that they'll be here in the morning. And so what we want to show is really sort of the British army in garrison. A lot of times when you see British units in, at a
Mhm.
reenactment, it's sort of focused around a battle of some sort, whether
Right.
it's a fictionalized battle or reproduction of or
Mhm.
reconstruction of the actual thing. This we want to talk about, what are these people doing in camp? How are
Mhm.
they, how are they going through their daily lives? And we also want to talk about this tension that is developing in
Mhm.
town. So across the street in front of our historic buildings, we're going to have a number of folks who are going to be portraying legislators.
Mhm.
So we'll have folks, somebody portraying John Adams. We'll have
Mhm.
other legislators, other merchants in town.
Mhm.
So you can come to. We have one area that's going to be set up as the tavern. So you can
Mhm.
come to Mrs. Pratt's Tavern, and you can sort of hear and partake in some of this debate, ask
Right.
questions of folks
Mhm.
who are involved in
Mhm.
this. And then next to the on the sort of the other side of the fence, if you will, we will have the loyal ladies of Salem.
Mhm.
We'll have them doing a tea party, because we do have some evidence that, particularly some of the loyal women in town were socializing with the officers at the fort. Mary
Hmm.
Vile Holyoke, who is the wife of the most well-established doctor in town, and she had I believe it was one of the Hutchinson daughters, was staying with her own sort of teenage daughter.
Hmm.
And there are several times where she's mentioning in her diary, she's like, "Oh, I took tea with the officers again." I can
Ah.
imagine, chaperoning these young girls into a situation with a bunch of officers must have been
Mhm. Mhm.
interesting. And you can hear some of that. And then we're also going to have one area that's set up for as King Street, which is now Essex Street. That is where a lot of the tradespeople were. So
Mhm.
you can talk to. We're gonna have a grocer. We're gonna have a wig maker, and all
Hmm.
of these folks are going to have opinions about the closure of the Port of Boston, the
Right.
impact on their community, because they're
Mhm.
also starting to see a lot of people sort of moving business to Salem.
Mhm.
And so somebody who has been well established, what are they going to do when this new competition comes into town?
Right. Right.
So
Interesting.
yeah, and then we're also gonna have some presentations on Black Salem. We have
Mhm.
some folks who are doing a lot of research on the history of the people of African descent in
Mhm.
Salem, so they're going to be talking about that as
Interesting.
well.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
And so, about how many guys men would be in a regiment? So,
Oh man,
I'm s-
now you've got me. I think we're talking up to a couple of hundred,
okay,
in
because
in
we have,
a in
yeah.
a in a regiment. I that
So
that that
so
number
it's a
escapes me.
significant boost to the population.
It
Suddenly, you
it
have
is.
lots of these other people along with their
Yeah.
families coming.
Yeah, exactly. I think we are, we're talking, we're talking a few hundred people,
Yeah. Yeah.
in total when you're
Yeah.
looking at all of this.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I can
I
imagine. I
didn't
mean,
mean to stump you. Um,
no, no, no. I just that's one of those numbers that I can just I get
yeah.
it, and then it
Yeah.
it just escapes my
And
head.
we know
And
it varies. That sometimes this is a subject for another day. Um,
yeah.
okay, so you do have. It sounds
So
like a great series of
I
wrenches.
actually just looked up Timothy Pickering letter, and he says that there are about 300 men and about as many women and children.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
So that's what they're. And I
Like
see
600
Jonathan.
is, yeah.
Yeah, I
Jonathan's
see.
telling us 4 to 500
Yeah,
generally, and then so if we're thinking then they practically so you have 4,200 or so folks in Salem, and then suddenly you
yeah,
have maybe 1,000 more who have arrived as part of
yeah.
this force, along with these businesses moving up from Boston. So it is a big
Yeah,
change.
so it's a stress on
Yeah.
it's a stress on the community, the infrastructure, of the community is also under stress. There's this census in 1764 that's taken, and Boston at that time in 1764 has 1,676 houses
Mhm.
listed in it. Salem only has 509.
Wow.
So that's, just people finding places to stay,
Yeah.
is going to be an issue. And anyone who has places to rent is probably,
Mhm.
trying to make like an Airbnb today. They're trying to
Yeah.
get as many
Yeah.
people into it
Yeah.
as they can.
Yeah. 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 We're talking with Emily Murphy, the curator of the Salem Maritime National Historical Site, as well as the Saugus Ironworks National Historical Site. And so, what happened? How long then does this occupation of Salem last? It starts around June when Gage arrives and the capital moves, and then what happens?
Yeah, so basically at the end of August is when there is a is there's the town meeting in Salem in August of 1774.
Now,
And
Gage had said you can't have a town meeting.
exactly.
How
So
does that
so
happen?
Gage had said you can't have town meeting. A lot of town meetings sort of got away with that by just keeping a town meeting in adjournment,
Right. Yeah.
over and over again. But what happens is that this is right after the whole situation with the counselors start.
Yes.
That's sort of late July, early August. And so there is an Essex County convention or conference that is uh, held or is
Mhm.
going to be held. And so Salem tries to meet to elect delegates to this Essex County conference. And the Committee of Safety tries to get around the Massachusetts, or the town tries to get around the Massachusetts Government Act by saying, well, our Committee of Safety is holding this meeting,
Mhm.
not the
Town.
town. Um, Most of the selectmen were also on the Committee of Safety.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's one of those, it looked the same. And that's basically what Gage points out. He's like, it looks the same. It's the same people. There is a confrontation where Gage, as this town meeting is happening, Gage, um, Gage hauls the Committee of Safety in front of him and basically threatens puts out arrest warrants on all of
Hmm.
these people. So he starts yelling. But apparently, he and Richard Derby Jr. They go at it hammer and tongs about the legality of this meeting,
Hmm.
and then it ends with Gage, trying to, declaring that they'll be arrested. And Timothy Pickering bails himself out. He decides to pay the fine or whatever it is. But the rest of the counselors, the Committee of Safety members say, no, 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 go ahead, arrest us. And at
Wow.
this point, things start to get ugly.
Hmm.
And Gage calls the 59th to march into town and break up this town meeting.
Wow.
Which, this is something that's sort of a repeated story over and over again, with a lot of this legislative session and the other meetings, is that, they basically get their business done real quick. And so by the time the 59th actually gets there, everybody's just sort of standing around going, hey, what's going on? We were just, having a thing. We're gonna
Wow. Wow.
and so there's this sort of confrontation. And then uh, there's one of Gage's officers. I can't remember his full name. His last name is Montresor.
Hmm.
Actually, then um, persuades, says, look, you are not safe here.
Hmm.
And they're very, very worried about, sort of the countryside uprising, and
So Gage
particularly.
isn't safe in Salem.
That's what yes. So that's what his officers are apparently telling him. That
Hmm.
Montresor records in his diary that he tells Gage he's not safe in Salem. And so by, the end of August, on the 27th or thereabouts, Gage and his furniture are going back to Boston.
Wow.
Because I guess at least they feel like they can the
Hmm.
you know control things a little bit better in Boston, probably because of
Wow.
the neck and the structure of Boston at that time. And so the but the
It's interesting because remember the whole British assumption was Boston was the place that where all the trouble was, but now they find
yeah,
that's the only safe place for Gage because Salem is out of control.
yeah, and I think a lot of it, I mean, someone who is more, more has studied more about Boston at this time can probably speak to this a little bit better. But I would be willing to bet it's because of the fact that the harbor is deeper
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Boston, so you can
yeah.
get naval vessels, and you can't
Right.
really get a large naval vessel into Salem
Mhm.
Harbor.
Yeah.
And so, so I think they just, they feel safer, the fact that they've got the naval support and the fact that they can cut off, they can close the neck,
Right. Yeah.
as well. So,
Hmm.
so I think that's sort of the sort of point that they're thinking
Yeah.
about. And so but the 59th regiment actually stays in Salem
Hmm.
until mid-September.
Okay.
So they're here for another few weeks.
Hmm.
The 64th is actually in Marblehead, at least through the end of September into October.
Hmm.
And there's Ashley Bowen over in Marblehead reports that apparently there was a confrontation or some sort of he says it's an attack
Hmm.
on a citizen of Marblehead by a soldier of the 64th, and that ends with their captain being replaced,
Wow.
and that soldier being punished. And that's at the end
Mm.
of September.
Fascinating.
So it's not, I mean, it's not very long, but it's like
Yeah.
it's a critical moment though, in
Hmm.
in sort of what's going on in terms
Yeah.
of political stuff
Hmm.
in Salem at that time. This is
Yeah.
the time period. One of the things the legislature does is they send delegates, they assign delegates to go to the
Hmm.
First Continental
Right.
Congress.
Right.
And then
And they're
by the
doing that
end,
while Gage is having the provincial secretary say the assembly is suspended.
exactly. He actually, this is a great story because Thomas Flucker, who was his
Mhm.
his his secretary, uh, basically walks up to, goes to the then townhouse, which is no longer exists, unfortunately, but the townhouse
Mhm.
was on the second floor of the building, and turns out somebody has locked the door to
Wow.
the legislative session. So Flucker is actually standing on the stairs outside the legislative session, reading Gage's, orders
Mm.
to dissolve the
Mm.
legislature, and then he tacks it to the door.
Wow.
And then at the end, so they make their decisions. They decide on the delegates. They open the door and they're like, "Oh, what's this?"
Ah,
So this is, and this is something that they sort of keep doing, is sort of they're
right.
just a prolonged thumbing their nose
Mhm.
at
Yeah.
Gage's authority throughout that
Yeah.
summer.
Yeah.
And of
And
course,
then
go
yeah,
ahead.
and then they've elected a new assembly, and then Gage decides they're not going to meet after all. So these guys go to Salem. They say they didn't hear
Yeah.
that he had.
Exactly. Oh, we never got the email,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's basically that's the point at which the legislature tells Gage to go take a hike and takes
Yeah.
control, becomes the provincial legislature and
Right.
takes control
Yeah.
of Massachusetts. I mean, these are politically, this is such an important,
It is.
turning point, in terms of Massachusetts committing itself to this patriot
Mm.
cause.
It really is. It really is and it's a story we don't really know enough about. And so I'm really glad you're looking into this and doing more to both figure it out, but also to tell us about it.
Yeah, it's one of these things that I first came across this story in when I was doing my dissertation work at BU,
Mhm.
and it's been so cool to sort of bring that into the public history side of
Mm. Yeah.
things, and help people kind of engage with it, because I think so much of the what we're seeing both here and in other countries, is sort of part of this debate, this realization that or hopefully one of the things we're helping people realize is that this was not an easy decision for people.
Right. Oh, yeah.
To there are all sorts of things to weigh.
Hmm.
And in fact, in so many ways, the revolution was a civil war.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It was, it was one of these things that literally split families.
Right. Yeah. So, do you know what happens to those? We know about what happens with Pickering and the Darbys. What about those friends of the government, the ones who had said this is going to be great? We want to support the new regime under General Gage.
Almost all of them end up declaring as loyalists after
Hmm.
April 19th, 1775,
Hmm.
and quite a few of them end up fleeing to either Halifax, Nova Scotia,
Hmm.
or to England itself. So Benjamin Lind is one of these folks.
Hmm.
Benjamin Pickman, John Mascarene.
Hmm.
There are a few exceptions. There are some folks who are able to kind of tread the line.
Hmm.
So Edward Holyoake, who did sign
Hmm.
the loyal oath, he's the doctor in town. He
Hmm.
is very well regarded. He
Hmm.
is a conservative, but he manages to not have anyone come out against him. Um, the William Pynchon, who actually leaves a fascinating diary of his time. He is a lawyer,
Hmm.
and he ends up doing badly. He stays in
Hmm.
Salem, but at one point all of his windows get broken.
Wow.
He actually ends up kind of being forced to sell his house. One of the Derbys buy it.
Mm.
So that's it's kind of an interesting thing. And Benjamin Pickman actually leaves his wife behind, as does Samuel Kerwin
Wow.
when they leave. This, of course, creates a bit of an issue for
Mhm.
the revolutionary authorities, because they didn't want to if Love Rollins Pickman is staying behind, it's kind of showing that she's adhering to the patriot cause,
Right. Yeah.
but her husband is left, so they
Hmm.
kind of leave her alone. So both Pickman and Kerwin managed to return after the revolution and take up their spots in society,
Hmm.
and don't and sort of retain their importance.
Hmm.
John Prince, who's actually a brother-in-law to the Darbys, Elias Haskett and Richard
Hmm.
Jr., he actually ends up fleeing to Halifax. They're trying to get out shortly after the Lexington and Concord happen,
Hmm.
and they get most of their stuff onto a vessel to go to Halifax, and I guess a mob attacks
Oh,
a
wow.
lot of their supplies
Hmm.
and steals them. Prince leaves, but the Darbys take care of his property. So
Hmm.
there's correspondence
Interesting.
between them where they're sort of like, yeah, I owed you this debt, so I'm gonna send you some money,
Hmm.
to basically taking care of Martha Darby, Prince.
Interesting.
And the princes don't come back until the about the 1790s. They end up in New
Hmm.
Brunswick for a while, and they don't come back to Salem. They end
Hmm.
up down near Jamaica Plain.
Okay.
Um, but their sons all end up working for Elias Haskett Darby.
Wow.
So
Okay. That's for a
yeah,
lot of people, isn't it?
yeah. So it's
Yeah.
so a lot of these folks, sort of end up on the wrong side
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Jonathan points out that William Brown was a Salem merchant who becomes governor of Bermuda, so he did pretty well, I guess.
Yes, they do. I mean, a lot of these guys are, highly connected, through their political careers, and
Mm.
they do end up landing on their feet.
Mhm.
But Brown also, I mean, Brown's got like other connections that he's using, which is how he ends up as governor of Bermuda. A lot of the sort of multi-generational older families, they're coming back to Salem because this is what they know. And
Right.
Kerwin talks about, when he's in England, he kind of feels like he's, that he
Mm.
everybody's looking down on him because he is an American.
Mm.
Um, so it's an interesting sort of situation these folks find themselves in.
Now, getting back briefly to your occupation on the weekend of the 15th and 16th, another thing you're having is an Anglican service.
Yes. So this is really exciting. The St. Peter's Church, which was the Anglican church in Salem, founded in 1733, and they have been doing a lot of research into their own history
Hmm.
recently. They've been looking at what their involvement was with the slave trade
Hmm.
and enslavement in Salem, but also just sort of generally engaging with some of their history. The building was actually replaced in 1833 with this beautiful stone Gothic
Hmm.
building, but they kept the pews, the old pews on the interior, and so General Gage's pew is still there. Interestingly, the way that the church is now oriented, it's oriented to the short side of the church, whereas the original entry was on the long side
Hmm.
when on the
Hmm.
original building. And so Gage's pew actually faces the entrance on the long side, what would have been the entrance on the long side of the building, which is really interesting. So Reverend Ives, who is the minister there. He's been doing some research, and they're putting together an 18th century Anglican um, Anglican service for us in the morning. So at 9 a.m., and everyone is welcome to join us. General Gage will be there.
Hmm.
It's gonna be a lot of fun.
It should be. It should be, and I hope it is mainly the friends of the government and not the ones who are giving him so much trouble who are there. Um,
Yes,
uh,
actually, the story that they were telling me is that the glass gets broken in the church later on, because I guess the minister who was there at the time,
hmm.
refused to pack up and leave. Uh,
Wow. Wow. Well, it's an incredible story. Now, everyone knows one thing about Salem, but you are telling a much different story. So I wonder if you could just tell us about what we would see when we visit the Salem Maritime National Historical Site, which has great stuff, great things to see. So what are your favorite things about it? What?
yes. So I always like to tell people that Salem has 10 months of witches and almost 400 years of everything else.
Yeah.
So Salem is a really exciting city to visit. It is a very walkable city.
Hmm.
So the center section of town is only about a mile from end to end, from the witch
Hmm.
house on one end to the House of the Seven Gables on the other. So Salem Maritime was founded in 1937, and we are here to talk about the maritime heritage of New England and the United States. We focus
Hmm.
really on Salem, and we're about 9 acres, and that includes the last remaining colonial era wharves in Salem. So we have Derby, Hatches, and Central wharves. Derby Wharf is in its final iteration. It was extended around 1806,
Hmm.
and it's about half a mile long out to the lighthouse on the end. Across the street from that, we have the Derby family's starter home, if you will. They do end up building a bigger mansion uptown, which no longer exists, as well as a couple of other buildings, and the custom house that was built in 1819, where Nathaniel Hawthorne lived. So we're talking about that sort of economic political story
Hmm.
of the founding of our nation. Our resources go from 1675 as our earliest building up to
Hmm.
1909. So that sort of the founding of the nation, that economic story, the people who are involved in that economic story, whether on purpose or not,
Hmm.
and how the government gets involved
Hmm.
with this to help either regulate or make money off of it.
Hmm.
And so but it's also just a wonderful place to recreate. I mean, walking out the wharf, especially on a beautiful day, not so much today, it's kind of raining, but we also have lawn chairs set out on the wharf area. So if you just need a little breather and to
Mhm.
breathe some sea air, look across to Marblehead, see the boats in the harbor. It's a
Mhm.
wonderful thing. But just walking up and down the streets of Salem is really interesting because you get to see, some of the along sort of Essex and Derby Street or Derby Street, which are the parallel sort of main parallel streets
Mhm.
in Salem. You have these wealthy merchant homes that are built in the 18th century, but then on the side streets, the connector streets, is where the sort of more middling class
Yeah.
folks, the not quite so successful
Mhm.
merchants and captains and businessmen were
Mhm.
living. And it's a lovely town to walk around. And of course, post revolution, we have Chestnut Street, which is where all of these extremely wealthy merchants
Mhm.
were building their homes.
Yeah.
So
And the Derby House was actually one of the grandest houses in the entire country, I understand.
the mansion that they built after they
Yeah.
moved out of their what they called their little brick house,
Mhm.
was considered, it was equated to the palaces of Europe when it was finished, and
Mm.
unfortunately, it only lasted about 20 years. The sort of next generation of Darbys, past Elias Haskett, unfortunately inherited all of their money just in time for the embargo of
Ah.
1807 to really destroy a lot of the mercantile trade for a little while.
Mhm.
And so
Mm.
so they lost they lost it. Ended up being torn down because nobody could take on a building that large at that time. So yeah, so
Mm.
the but the and the Derby House, the Derby House. I say Derby because the name was pronounced Derby in the 18th
Okay.
century, but most people say Derby nowadays. But the house was actually built as a wedding present for Elias Haskett Derby
Wow.
and his wife Elizabeth Crowninshield in 1762, and they lived there up until about 1775. It seems that they left the house after the burning of Charlestown,
Mhm.
and then when they came back, it helps when your brother is on the committee to distribute Tory property.
Right.
And we mentioned William Brown, the governor of
Yeah.
Bermuda, earlier. Well, they were able to lease his house from the town committee of safety, and then eventually buy it and replace it with the mansion.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
fascinating stories in Salem, and
Yeah.
I thank you for sharing them. I mean, this is great. We've been talking with Emily Murphy. I mean, is there more? We could probably go on all day talking about Salem, and people should visit to see what there
I
is
mean,
there.
yeah, and I think, and just, to keep you coming back, of course, we've got this wonderful event happening in on June 15th and 16th. But as we sort of move into the actual war in 2025 and further, our big story becomes privateering.
Mm.
And so this is the use of your mercantile fleets to 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 basically cut your supply lines to your enemy,
Right.
and impact their economy.
Mm.
And Salem becomes one of the most successful privateering ports in the country. And Elias Haskett Darby is one of the leaders of privateering. It's estimated that he some folks estimate that he ran as much as 5% of all American privateering off of Derby
Wow.
Wharf.
Wow. Wow. And there you have a vessel too.
We do. Friendship of Salem. She's been going through a bunch of repairs right now, so she doesn't have all of her masts up and things like that. But she is open
Mm.
to the public on weekends mostly, when the work on her allows. We also do tours of the Darby House and the Narbonne House, which is our
Mm.
1675 house, mostly on the weekends right now.
Mm.
But as we staff up, we'll have some more. And then we have the visitor center is located in the Salem Armory, right in the center of town at 2 New Liberty Street. So
Great.
I highly recommend you start your visit to Salem there. We have a couple of introductory films about the
Right.
witchcraft trials, and that will be a great place to pick up a map, use the restroom, and be your base of operations for your visit to Salem.
Great. Great. Well, thank you so much. We've been talking with Emily Murphy, who is the curator of the Salem Maritime National Historical Site, also the Saugus Iron Works National Historical Site, also worth visiting, not pertaining
Yes.
to this revolution. So thank you, Emily, for joining us and for
You're very welcome. I really appreciate the time, Bob.
Thank you. And I want to thank Jonathan Lane, our producer, also for telling us how many men are in a company and how many in a regiment, as well as the life of William Brown. And I want to thank our many listeners, both around Massachusetts and around the country and around the world. And if you're in one of these places and want to send Jonathan Lane an email, jlane@revolution250.org, he'll send you a set of Revolution 250 playing cards or other goods we have. So, folks, this week in Salem or Marblehead, as well as Brighton, Lexington, Acton, all here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Providence, Rhode Island, Sterling, Virginia, Campinas in Sao Paulo, Brazil, Louisburg, North Carolina, and Tel Aviv, Israel. And thank you all for joining us and people in places beyond and between. And now we will be piped out on the road to Boston.